I've been down before to come up, I ain't stressing. Baby, I'm too busy counting all these blessings. Blessings. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Blessings. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Blessings. Blessings. I've been down before the come up, I ain't stressing. Baby, I'm too busy counting all these blessings. Blessings. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Than the next man. I've been down before the come up, I ain't stressing. Baby, I'm too busy counting all these blessings. Blessings. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Blessings. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Count it up, count it up, count it up. Blessings, blessings, blessings.
I was finally comfortable with being weak and imperfect in the music. I think of it almost as an artistic bridge between who I was and who I am. The problem with bridges is that they often get walked on from both sides. Secular critics didn't understand it because it felt so Christian, and many of my core Christian fans didn't understand it because it wasn't preachy. They were used to me playing the pastor rapper role. Killer never directly mentioned God or Jesus, and neither did Background. So I lost some fans after the album released. But I was confident I was moving in the direction God was calling. And I was also sure that this was only the beginning. The authenticity of Rehab caught the attention of some mainstream influencers. And in 2011, I was invited to participate in the BET Cypher. This is an event in conjunction with the BET Hip Hop Awards, where some of the best young artists gather to rap 16 bars and show off their talent. Those familiar with hip hop know this can make or break an artist. The cypher took place in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and I didn't have much time to prepare. On the flight up and the hours preceding it, I was sweating. What would I say to a mainstream audience who wasn't familiar with me or my music? This was a watershed moment, so I knew I couldn't just spit a few lyrical bars like everyone else. Sure, I wanted to have a good delivery, but I also wanted to show people that you can be good at your craft and true to your faith at the same time. Watching like, man, I never heard of him, I'll murder him, the nerve of him, rocking with Premier, that's so absurd of him. Wait until he spit a couple verbs at them. If you really wanna hate, wait, he got the word with him, I hear him holler, Jesus, the notorious, no, the most glorious, homie. Some Christians who saw it weren't happy with me using a notorious B.I.G. reference to talk about Jesus, and for giving a nod to DJ Premier, who was produced for most of mainstream hip-hop's elite artists. But I had just taken the same approach Apostle Paul did in Acts 17. Our situations weren't that different. Paul had been invited to speak in Areopagus, a place where all of the influential voices in his day gathered to trade ideas. In explaining what he believed, Paul used the language of the culture and referenced their popular poets. I used the language of hip-hop, which I've spoken fluently since I was a kid. And I referenced some of our most prominent poet rappers. When I flew home afterward, I felt at peace with my performance. We had moved to Atlanta, and I started forming friendships with lots of non-Christian people. I struggled at first. I hadn't engaged with many non-Christians since coming to faith, except to argue with them about how sinful they were. Figuring out how to be friends with people who didn't believe in Jesus without compromising my beliefs was a process. I slowly learned how to love non-Christians without pushing them away. These relationships opened me up artistically, and I began to feel it was time to take another step forward. I received a random phone call to people instead of at people. The result was a mixtape we called Church Clothes. The lyrics were stripped of most of the Christianese that shackled my previous music, even Rehab. Rather than try to preach at people, the songs dealt with real problems head on. In Cold World, I talked about the difficulties of living in a broken world of poverty and violence. One song, The Price of Life, dealt with rampant materialism. She camouflaged her insecurity in Jimmy Choo's. High heels, but the mountaintop she'll never choose. She'll settle for a dude in precious metals. A slave to his money buys change, you could tell it. Church Clothes was more than just an honest album. In some ways, the album was a definitive declaration of my new direction. I was proclaiming that the music I was committed to making was for all people. I was declaring that I was no longer striving to be Christianity's golden child or get a pat on the back from religious celebrities. I was gonna have to have the conversations I felt God calling me to curate. I was gonna tell the real and raw stories and let the chips fall where they may. In this way, Church Clothes was a manifesto of who I felt God had called me to be. A hip-hop artist who is a Christian, but doesn't fit inside a box. I'd always been a truth teller, but now I was speaking in a way that made sense to people outside of the Christian faith too. The title track was even written from the perspective of a non-Christian. It talked about the hypocrisy and corrupt pastors and gay choir members who are stuck in the closet. The honesty resonated, and the mixtape blew up on that piff. It was downloaded more than 100,000 times in the first 48 hours. The traffic overloaded their servers and crashed the website. 250,000 people snatched it up by the end of the month. We were all shocked. But while the music was surging, some of my Christian fans were confused by the new direction. Looking back, I should have been more explicit with what God was leading me to do. My silence left my longtime fans in the dark about the evolution of the music. The dam of their frustration broke less than a year later when I released my next studio album, Gravity, which pushed even further. I even teamed up with mainstream rapper Big Crit on one of the tracks. Some thought I'd gone too far. Former fans wrote hateful things about me on blogs. They labeled me a sellout and a fake. Some attacked me personally, even questioning whether I was really a Christian. Some people contacted venues and tours to get me banned from performing. Crowds started showing up to protest my concerts. People were posting YouTube videos condemning me to hell, even suggesting I join the Illuminati. I was being criticized in public for the first time in my career, and I didn't know how to manage it. I was angry and hurt at first. I protested in prayer. If these are your people, God, I don't want to be like them. I even flipped out to my wife, screaming about how betrayed I felt. I was just trying to follow God's calling on my life, I told her. I was still unashamed of my faith. That hadn't changed. But now I was being bold with my art. Why were people attacking me? My wise wife encouraged me to get off social media and spend more time with God. I knew she was right. I grabbed a few books, my Bible, and locked myself in my closet. I read a biography of Francis Schaeffer, a Christian thinker who showed the world what it meant to live with a Christian worldview. Schaeffer knew what being criticized felt like, and it drove him to make sure he knew what he believed too. Reading Schaeffer sent me back, once again, to the Gospels. I read about how Jesus' heart for the world incited the anger of the religious community, but it never stopped him from doing what he believed the Father was calling him to do, even if that meant laying his livelihood and his life on the altar. If religious people wanted to crucify me for trying to reach the non-religious, I concluded, I was in pretty good company. I emerged from my closet with a new confidence and peace. And a few days later, I had a conversation with Pastor Rick Warren that confirmed everything God had been saying. If you're gonna call the shots, Lecrae, you're gonna have to take them too, he told me. For every 1,000 people you influence, you'll have 100 critics. And many of them will call themselves Christian. That just comes with the territory. Once again, I committed to die to the acceptance of men, to refocus all my attention on God's glory and his calling on my life. I had learned to be unashamed in the midst of a fallen world. Now I needed to learn to be unashamed in the midst of a religious world. I started to realize that Christian bloggers and critics will find a reason to scrutinize almost anything. At my first mainstream hip-hop festival, Paid Dues Festival in Los Angeles, I performed after Macklemore. At another festival, I performed alongside Wu-Tang Clan. People went out of their way to express frustrations at me sharing the stage with these quote-unquote secular artists. Some critics were angry that a YouTube video showed me rocking my head to profane music. But my critics almost lost their minds when they became aware of my friendship with Kendrick Lamar. But the critics didn't know the whole story. Critics almost never do. Things aren't inherently evil or bad, but they have been tainted with sin. Because of Jesus, we don't need to see culture as something to be avoided. It is something to be engaged. You cannot stomp something you're running away from. You cannot influence something you never encountered. A good example of a biblical worldview is Daniel. I like Daniel. If he were alive now, we'd probably hang out. In the Bible, Daniel was an advisor to a king named Nebuchadnezzar. Working for the king was a pretty good gig, but things got weird when the king had some crazy dreams. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to know what they meant, so he summoned his advisors. In those days, interpreting dreams was a pagan practice. If Daniel was wearing bifocals, he would have seen this as a secular action, an evil action, something that people who serve God didn't do. But Daniel didn't see the world like that. He knew that, as the psalmist would later write, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So Daniel goes to God, and God tells him what the dreams meant. When Daniel interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king was impressed and appointed Daniel his chief advisor. Now, if Daniel were living in our world, he might have turned down the job and enrolled in seminary, but he didn't, because he saw this secular job as part of his sacred calling. And because he didn't see the world as divided, he took the job and was able to speak godly wisdom into Nebuchadnezzar's life. This has changed the way I do music. There's no such thing as Christian rap and secular rap. Only people can become Christians. Music can't accept Jesus into its heart. So I'm not trying to make Christian music or secular music. I'm just making music. Hip-hop, like all music, is a good thing. I could use it for evil by filling it with violence and misogyny and profanity. Or I can use it to glorify God. Every song I write doesn't have to have the gospel spelled out or quote scripture so people will know I love Jesus. My goal is to just use my gifts to produce great art that tells the truth about the world. If I see the world through a biblical lens, the music will naturally paint a picture that serves people and honors God. The same is true for you. If you're a politician, you don't have a secular job. If you're a computer programmer, you don't have a secular job. The term secular is defined as an attitude, activity, or thing that has no religious or spiritual basis. But there is nothing on the planet that God isn't ruling over. Everything a believer touches and uses in a way that honors God is, in a sense, no longer secular. We all bring our sacred callings into a world that God created and called good and that has been tainted by sin, but where God wants to use us to impact for his glory. What is true for a job is true for everything in the world that God has called good. Dancing is good. Movies are good. Music is good. The hearts of men, however, have been tainted by sin. So the way we use these good things can be bad. Some Christians have talked about sex like it's inherently bad. You can use it for evil by becoming a prostitute, or you can use it for good by enjoying the gift of sex in the context of marriage. If I stab you with a knife, that's evil. But I can also use that knife to carve a Thanksgiving turkey for a family in need. Rather than thinking about the world in categories of simply good and evil, a biblical worldview helps us think in categories of good and redeemable. You and I may come from different backgrounds and live in different cities and have different jobs and be separated in age by decades, but we have the same calling, to be instruments of God's redemptive power in the world. The Apostle Paul wrote, "We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." The word for workmanship is poema. We are God's poem to the world. A poem articulates the heart, the mind, and the character of the poet. Your calling may not be to write music or produce music or sing music, but that's okay. You are music. You're God's music. And God doesn't just want to break records and top charts with you. He wants to change lives and industries and society. By God's grace, I'm going to keep making the music as long as I have air in my lungs. But my prayer is that you'll make music too. Maybe not with your voice, maybe not on the stage, but hopefully with your life. And may God get the glory from the music we create. Keep on creating.
Okay, so we see Lecrae and his wife making the super excellent Master Mason symbol. And this comes from the York Rite of Freemasonry. And we also see here, and I just included this in Stephen Furtick and Joyce Meyer, Carl Lentz, Louis Giglio, John Gray, and many more from his church and ministry making this same symbol. And then we also see here a picture of Aleister Crowley making the same symbol. So my question is, why is Lecrae and his wife, why are they making this symbol? Now I know they can try to claim, oh, it means Wakanda forever. Well, Wakanda is not real, but we know Masonry is, and I believe we're seeing enough signs and symbols to put all the pieces together. The X over the chest or the crossed arm symbol can also be a symbol for the Antichrist. The X is a representation of the mark of the beast as well. Think about 666 or XXX, and you think about XXX porn, like triple X porn. So we know that this symbol is also tied to the Antichrist, which again is the ruler of the one world religion, one world government, one world currency, one world everything. Here we have Lecrae and the vow of silence. And in the description, he says, even fools look wise if they keep silent, which is actually a proverb from the Holy Scriptures. But since he's so ashamed, he puts Jewish proverb.
This is 3 sixes in the eye. So you can see that arrangement of 3 sixes in the eye of Lucifer. So you understand 666 means Satan or Lucifer. The eye, distinguishing that eye, means Horus or Lucifer. And then here we have this sign of silence being used. And that sign of silence, you're going to find out right now. We'll go into that sign rather than the 666 sign. This is Osiris in the middle, Isis, and Horus. And you can see Horus puts the finger to the lips. Horus has a counterpart in Greece, which is Harpocrates, and you can see the finger going to the lip in that case. You can also see similarities between the adornment of these gods as well. Harpocrates or Horus, note the serpent and other symbols and figures around him. Notice also the finger to his mouth and the harp-shaped object on his head. The comedian Harpo Marx imitated this deity, and there is Harpo Marx. And he's doing the sign of Horus or Lucifer or Harpocrates. That's why he's named Harpo. It just so happens that Oprah Winfrey has her studios called Harpo. There's dual symbolism here. Harpo refers to Harpocrates, I believe, and therefore Lucifer. Oprah is Harpo backwards, so you have now this dual symbology. They love to do things front and backwards. Backward masking in Satanism is key, so it was very well thought about of Harpo Studios. So you can see here silence, the sign of silence. Here's a 2-finger method, and I'll show you how they do it with variants of that. I believe this is African. I'm not sure there, but here we have Horus, Egyptian god. Oh, this is Osiris doing that sign. So we have different gods doing the same sign, but it all references that satanic trinity and these gods that have multiple disguises or manifestations. In Freemasonry, you have now the signs of silence. So now you have a reference to secret societies keeping silent about things, so that dual symbolism of keeping silent and the signs of Horus and Lucifer. Journal of the Masonic Society, now you can see the sign being done. Here's Harpocrates as a sculpture, sign of silence. You have a Masonic Lodge in Oklahoma City. Now this is key as well, because you see now the Aeon, and the Aeon of Horus, or the Age of Horus. And you see Horus in the background, the hawk shape, and now you see this sign of silence, finger to the mouth. Aleister Crowley and secret societies, and you can see that that is the use of the sign of silence or the sign of Horus. You can also see the pyramid with eye at the top. This is Wicca, witchcraft, and you understand that by the crescent moon and the sun or the star there. Here is that sign of silence again. Down pointing usually means the female aspect or earth. So you'll see some of that later. You can see this priest, Alumbrados, Illuminati, and these monks and brothers. Now we have a reference to monks and brotherhoods, Jesuits and Jesuitism going all the way back through the Roman Empire. And so I'm going to hold that there, but this is Ignatius Loyola, who is the founder of the Jesuits. And you're going to understand what Jesuitism is, going from Jesuitism, Roman Empire, to Jesuitism, to with Gnosticism, and then through onto Freemasonry, founded by Jesuits. And we have Benedictus, and you see the sign of silence being used. Here is a Rosicrucian, so you can understand all of these secret societies, all of this stuff goes back, and Rosicrucianism is another secret society, and its roots in Gnosticism and monks and Jesuitism. R.C. Rosicrucian, and then you see the rosy cross being used. That's not a symbol of Christianity. Window. Moving along, here is Horus, this god, and then you see all of this sacred geometry, all of these patriarchs of science and diplomacy and stature, and then you have now coming on through the, looks like prelates and the Roman Empire, on through distinguished people like John Dee, who was in the court of Queen Elizabeth, and all of these dignitaries coming through, all of these elite coming through. What an image! And to show you that the sign of Horus now is being depicted on Mercury, the god Mercury. And there he is. There's Mercury again. It looks like now this is the sort of Jewish seven candelabra. I forget what that's called now, just slipped my mind. But just to show you that there is a counterfeit going on. And they use the symbols of these things to twist your brain into thinking that it's all part of the same thing. And so I want you to understand that there's counterfeit going on, and please understand that concept fully as we move along. Over here we have a portrait. This is supposed to be Jesus, and you see the man here doing this sign of silence. Very interesting symbology going on. Even the fingers have that symbology. We'll see a little bit of that later. And you see this woman in the background with a finger to the mouth. Horus, again, the baby Horus. This is called Silence, the sculpture, and you see the hawks on both sides and the finger to the mouth. This portrait with the child and the finger to the mouth. The Masonic checkerboard floor, and you see a lot of this going on here. Very interesting. Colin Powell, Jewish Magic and Kabbalism, gives a due guard of the Royal Archmason. All these guys at the top level. He is a Mormon, and you're going to find out that Mormonism was founded by Freemasons. Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, a Mason and a Druid priest, gives the sign of silence. Now, this is a key image here. You can understand now the use of the symbolism, dual use. She closes one eye to show you the eye of Lucifer, and then she does the same thing that Lady Gaga does on her album cover with the sign of Horus, and which is Lucifer. So that is a fashion shoot, and that's a studio image. And you can see the same thing going on. Basically, they're covering the eye instead of the OK sign in the eye, the 666 sign. Now, moving along with everyone doing the same thing, here's Rihanna. She actually tattooed "shh" on her finger. Lindsay Lohan did the same thing, as well as Lily Donaldson, doing the same thing, promoting the same thing. And now you can see them all doing it. This is amazing to me. And we don't get it, because this is a sign that they've made ubiquitous. Oh, shh, be quiet. That kind of thing. When you see it like this, and that she's closed her mouth with duct tape, and then she's giving the sign of the devil, then you can understand that's a dual symbolism there. This is that lady sovereign from the United Kingdom. Now, again, Here's the studio shot of a young Michael Jackson. He does everything as well as this sign. So you understand that that is a deliberate sign of Horus, aka Lucifer. You saw that two-finger symbolism up previously on this plate. And you can see Selena, Fergie, they all are doing it.
Okay, now for the next series of pictures, we're looking at Lecrae constantly throwing up the triangle. And as we seen earlier, he mocked about doing it, you know, basically was very condescending. But he knows what he's doing, and he knows he constantly throws up this hand sign. And we see other elite people like Angela Merkel, you know, Jay-Z, Donald Trump, other politicians, other foreign leaders. We see other entertainers, so-called pastors, and news anchors, and many other people throw up this sign. And most people who typically throw up the sign are Freemasons. It's not a normal hand sign to throw up. You know, it's not like someone's just going to stand there and just naturally put their hand in the size of a sign of a pyramid or a diamond or anything like that. They are forcibly making themselves make that sign. And typically when they're doing that sign in a controlled setting, it's because they're letting it be known who they're with and who they serve. And once again, we see Lecrae, many of these pictures are in controlled settings, and he's putting his hand in that shape. And I could go on and on and on about the rest of the symbols that are affiliated with Lecrae. Like we mentioned a little bit earlier, the Rosicrucian. We had all the roses and the cross in the background. If you go to the whole Together festival that Lecrae was a part of in 2016 and once again in 2018, they used the Ouroboros logo. I did a video on that before. There's other videos online about the Ouroboros. I'm not going to get too much more into detail about all these signs. We got Lecrae doing the vow of silence that I just showed. We have Lecrae throwing up the 666 hand sign, which is also, they say, the diamond for the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. But again, everything is done in these secret societies exoterically and esoterically, so it's always a double meaning. You know, just like with music that is influenced and controlled by Satan always has double meanings. You can hear meanings being played forward, and then you can also hear meanings being played backwards, like we've seen with the backmasking with the Lecrae Ty Dolla $ign song, for instance. I don't think all of these things that we're presenting today are just mere coincidences. I don't think it's a coincidence that they keep throwing up the X sign, and some can say, oh, well, that means for Wakanda. Well, again, we have to understand there's an exoteric and there's an esoteric. And these people who take these vows of silence that are a part of these different fraternities and secret societies, they always do all these different hand gestures and hand signs, and they'll try to play it off and act like they're not doing it for any satanic reason. But we know ultimately that's just not the case. Again, why do we see Lecrae wearing all these lightning bolts? We know that the lightning bolt is a representation of Satan. It's a representation of Lucifer when he fell from heaven. And as a matter of fact, since we're making the ultimate connection here, who the God is that Lecrae unfortunately is serving, we're just going to bring this thing full circle and get to wrapping this up today, brethren. All right, so it's in Isaiah 14. And it goes on and says, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Notice when we started reading in verse 11 of Isaiah 14, it said, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols. Because Lucifer, as the angel in heaven, he was built with instruments basically built into him. And I might include a picture of this, but there was a concert Justin Bieber had a few years ago where he was coming down from, you could say, like illustrating like he was coming down from the sky, and he had wings, and in his wings he had instruments. He was representing Lucifer. Now, just another side note, sidebar, I know they say or claim Justin Bieber is a Christian, and I really hope and pray Justin Bieber does get born again. You know, being that he was, I don't believe he is anymore, sitting under Carl Lentz and Hillsong. You know, it's hard to imagine that he was truly given the proper gospel. I remember a couple years ago when Brother Adam and I were preaching outside of the Justin Bieber concert. The first night Bieber was in town, Brother Adam had actually witnessed Lecrae go into the Justin Bieber concert. And Adam's like, hey, I know who you are. And he just kind of like, you know, threw up a deuce or whatever to Adam and just went about his business. You know, and Adam was telling him, hey, you know, he's basically wrong for going in there, and he's, you know, wrong for doing what he's doing. And then if you look recently, and I'll include a picture of it, on Lecrae's Instagram, again, he's repping Justin Bieber. Now, again, I hope and pray Justin Bieber gets saved, but, you know, we have Justin Bieber, you know, being displayed as or portrayed as Lucifer. We got Lecrae sitting here talking about the Light Bearer Lucifer initiative. You know, again, seeing all these connections that you could say basically implement him into being a Freemason. You know, he is an open Kappa Alpha Psi. And so it's not a stretch of the imagination, being the fact that he is a Kappa Alpha Psi, to question if he would then go into even higher fraternal organizations, such as the Freemasons, you know, the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templars, you know, Jesuits, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination at all, because we got to remember, once again, friends, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, you know, against spiritual wickedness in high places, you know, and the rulers of darkness of this world, so on and so forth, you know. So we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, man. Our warfare is not carnal. Our warfare is against the unseen forces that are trying to take our souls to hell. And once again, all of this is like full circle. All the different affiliations that Lecrae is having, you know, yoking up with all these different worldly rappers, all these different worldly individuals, all these different worldly musicians. I mean, you got Lecrae making songs with Ty Dolla $ign. His songs are filth. I mean, again, he makes songs talking about, you know, having sex, fornicating with other men's women, and he don't care about being the side guy. You know, he just wants to get in where he fits in. You know, all songs about drugs. You know, having Zaytoven produce his beats. You know, Zaytoven, once again, has made music for so many worldly individuals. And here's the problem, once again, just as we seen G. Craig Lewis talking about. The beats, man. The music. It's not always just about the lyrics. It's about the music as well. And once again, as I stated earlier, you can hear different frequencies and different tones with these newer headphones that they've come out with. You know, I always hear I believe Gary Price say, you know, the beast is in the beats. And you think about that. I mean, the beast is in the beats. And you see the Dre, his Beats headphones or whatever. I don't know if he sold it or not, but anyways, Beats by Dre they called it. Their B logo kind of looks like a 6. And in that one image I showed with the girl, you know, who was at the Lecrae show or at the Lecrae Trap Say Amen premiere or whatever, we seen that it was also sponsored by Beats by Dre. And had the 666 in the background. I mean, it's just too many coincidences for me. Too many coincidences for me to sit here and say that this guy is not a deceiver, that this guy's not deceiving people.